The very first murder conspiracy theory originated in 1791 when the legendary composer Mozart died of a strange illness. Before his death, the composer wrote a letter alleging that he was poisoned. But who, why, and how are questions people have been trying to answer for centuries, with new information emerging as present day as 2009. It was the first ever music conspiracy theory, and as we'll get into, there are some striking similarities between how his death was treated back then and how we look at mysterious deaths in music today. Make sure to subscribe if you like stories like this. Mozart was a child prodigy who showed phenomenal talent from a very young age. While growing up in the city of Salzburg in Austria, he composed music when he was 5 years old that is still listened to today. His father was a music teacher, so he was the perfect person to nurture his talent as he got older. He also toured across Europe as a small child and performed for various kings and nobles. This was before recorded music, so if you wanted to hear something, you could only hear it live. Mozart wrote his first symphony at 8 and his first concerto at 11. At 14, Mozart heard a song while visiting the Sistine Chapel in Rome and was able to replay this note for note when he got back to Austria. While many child prodigies never live up to their potential, Mozart excelled and became the greatest composer of his era. During his adulthood, his biggest rival at the time was a composer named Antonio Salieri. Mozart's father fervently believed that Salieri was jealous and trying to sabotage his career. When Mozart was 30 years old, his opera, Figaro, was first being performed, and Mozart's father believed that Salieri was trying to prevent it from happening. In one of his letters, Mozart's father said, "Salieri and all his supporters will again try to move heaven and earth to ruin his opera." Mozart also talked about cabals trying to destroy his career, specifically ones that came from Italy. Despite people trying to sabotage him, Mozart emerged as one of the most prolific musicians of his era and was rubbing shoulders in very high circles in Austria's capital city of Vienna. It was during Mozart's 30s that things took a turn for the worse. Despite being one of the most well-known musicians of his time, Mozart was broke. Classical music had fallen out of favor with the wealthy elite, and Mozart was losing money. Despite this, he had to keep up appearances and was spending money that he didn't have. His wife had also fallen ill, and he was paying for expensive spas that could heal her, according to medical knowledge at the time. During his mid-30s, Mozart embarked on a prolifically creative period and composed some of his greatest works. But at 35, he had fallen ill with something, was bedridden for 15 days, slipped into a coma, and died. A month after his death, the Berlin News reported, "Mozart is dead." Because his body swelled up after death, some people believe he was poisoned. Now that he is dead, the Viennese will at least realize what they have lost in him. In life, he was constantly the object of cabals, which he at times may well have provoked by his irreverent manner. The fact that the most famous musician of his time had been allegedly murdered was earth-shattering news, and the question on everyone's mind was, if so, who did it? The first theory. The first theory is Salieri. The vacuum of information about his death was immense. Doctors did not have to write down a cause of death. He was buried very quickly and there was no autopsy. So the only thing people had to work with was who would try to kill Mozart. Many people pointed the finger at Salieri. Unlike Mozart, Salieri lived a relatively long life, but in his 70s he had some form of dementia. In 1823, Salieri tragically tried to commit suicide, which many believed was down to guilt. It was shortly after this attempt that there was an alleged deathbed confession. Salieri supposedly confessed to killing Mozart. However, Salieri was not in a good state of mind, and two of his caregivers testified that he did not make this claim and it was just a rumor. Despite the lack of evidence, the story of Salieri killing Mozart lived on in local lore. 5 years after Salieri's death, a play was staged about this theory. 60 years after this play, it was converted into an opera. In the 20th century, the play Amadeus was staged about this theory and was later made into a movie in the 1980s. However, this was a classic case of never letting the facts get in the way of a good story. Other than his father's letter, there is very little evidence to suggest that Salieri was jealous or anything like the fictionalized character he is known for today. The reality was that Mozart had more than one enemy at this time, and one of his potential enemies was a lot more violent than Salieri. The second theory. Franz Hofdemel. A few days after Mozart's death, a woman called Magdalena Hofdemel was viciously attacked by her husband Franz. Despite being pregnant, Franz was in a vicious rage and tried to kill her. Magdalena also happened to be a student of Mozart's, and it was rumored that she was having an affair with the composer. Thankfully, Franz failed to kill his wife and their unborn child. But after this incident, He then took his own life. Franz Hofstadter was another serious suspect circulating at the time, and just like the Salieri theory, this was also made into a play, as well as a book. The composer Ludwig van Beethoven reportedly refused to perform in front of Magdalena because he blamed her for Mozart's death. One of the most compelling aspects of this theory is that Franz was a government official, and this explains why there was so little investigation into Mozart's death. The rumor is that he attacked Mozart and gave him a cerebral hemorrhage, which resulted in his death. But although Franz's character matches someone with the capacity to kill Mozart, and he had a clear motive, there's another person who was supposedly good friends with Mozart, but apparently changed his tune after his death. The third theory, Gottfried von Swieten. Gottfried von Swieten was a prominent surgeon in Vienna and a good friend of Mozart's. Because he was such a good friend, Mozart's widow asked him to look after the funeral arrangements. Von Swieten easily had the means to deliver a first-class funeral and burial, but Mozart was buried in a common grave. This undermined just how good friends they were. This also conveniently meant that Mozart was buried in a pauper's grave in the St. Mark's communal cemetery, so nobody knew where his grave was. At the time, von Swieten was desperately looking for a cure for syphilis and was trying to do this through mercury. So it was rumored that because he had access to mercury at the time, he could have easily poisoned the composer with this chemical. The biggest problem with this theory is that we don't have a motive. Unlike Salieri or Hofstadter, he was not jealous of Mozart's music, but a fan. However, it does lead us down the same route as many other conspiracy theories. All of these theories assume that someone was acting on their own to kill Mozart. But what if there was a secret group that was behind it all along? When Mozart was in his late 20s, he joined an exclusive group known as the Freemasons, and there is a theory that he may have angered them prior to his death. The fifth theory, the Freemasons. Even though Mozart was killed in the 1700s, there is still an Illuminati-type conspiracy about his death. At age 28, just 3 years after moving to Vienna, Mozart became one of 32 members of the Vienna Mason Lodge. This Freemason society was a secret group containing important figures in Vienna at the time, so it's highly likely that von Swieten was involved in this society. In Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, two characters join a secret society and undergo some initiation rites. It's believed that within this opera, Mozart was revealing the secrets of this society and needed to be getting rid of. One of the all too familiar themes of this theory is that it drifted into, quote, anti-Semitism. From 1939 to 1945, Austria was part of Nazi Germany, and the Nazis used the narrative that Freemasons were part of a Jewish conspiracy and may have killed Mozart. The irony of this theory, though, is that according to the historian William Stafford, very few Jewish people were allowed into the Freemason group during Mozart's time because of anti-Semitism. But like most conspiracy theories, the more reasonable explanations are less exciting, but more realistic. The boring truth is that the most plausible explanation was that Mozart was not poisoned and was simply ill. Not one of the doctors around him at the time suggested there was poisoning. The most common poisons at the time were either arsenic or mercury, but none of the symptoms associated with these types of poisoning were consistent with the symptoms that Mozart suffered during his death. Even still, there are varying theories about what illness he died from. In 2009, scientists from the Annals of Internal Medicine looked into this by examining the deaths of other people in Vienna at the time. They found that 5,011 adults died from symptoms similar to Mozart's between December 1791 and January 1792. There was a viral epidemic spreading through the area at the time, and it's highly likely that Mozart was another person inflicted. The virus was strep throat, something which is very curable today. Mozart had malaise, back pain, and a rash, all of which are symptoms of this infection. An article in Reader's Digest said, "Despite these intriguing coincidences, historians and biographers have given very little credence to the legend of Mozart's murder. Most believe, based on physicians' later reconstructions of the event, that he died of rheumatic fever, kidney failure, or pneumonia. Mozart's legacy can still be seen through his music, but his mysterious death may have also led to the culture of conspiracy theories that follow nearly almost any influential musician at the top who dies under mysterious circumstances." Make sure to subscribe for more.